Hello and welcome to Navigating the NIH Data Management and Sharing Policy Program. I'm Aretha Lafayette, Program Manager for Research Education, Program Development, and Outreach in the Office of Research and Innovation, and I will serve as your MC today. We have lots of valuable information to share with you, and here to kick things off is Dr. Seth Hays. Dr. Hays will serve as the moderator for the panel discussion. Dr. Hays, thank you for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Hello, welcome everybody. My name is Seth Hays. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Bioengineering here. I've been here for about the last 10 years. And so my research focuses on developing strategies to improve rehabilitation, and my lab works in both animals and humans. So hopefully I can impart some data or some information today about generating the data sharing policy. Excuse me. So with me, I have Dr. Nicole Nisco. She's an associate professor in the Department of Biology. So if you want to take a minute and introduce yourself, thank you for attending today.
Sure. Hi, I'm Nicole. My lab, I've been here since 2018, and my lab studies microbiome and urinary tract infections. And I have lots of clinical collaborations and main ones at the South Western Medical Center. So if you want to subjects work as well as animal works, all that fun stuff.
Thank you. And also we have Dr. Kristen Kennedy. She's a professor in BBS, Behavioral Brain Sciences, program head for cognitive neuroscience.
I'm Kristen. I started on the faculty in 2012. I only study humans. I do so mainly with MRI, imaging equipment. And I study kind of what are the cognitive and brain patterns that keep some people on a really nice aging trajectory and what knocks other people down.
Well, thank you both for joining today. So we're going to talk about the NIH Data Management and Sharing Plan, which is a key component of applications. Key component of applications that it changed recently. It changed in 2023. So I know we now have some experience in putting in the new version of it. But in the original version, this was only required for grants that either explicitly had some sharing component or that were over $500,000 a year. But now NIH has changed their policy. It needs to go in on, it seems like, if not all, virtually all of the grants, whether you have a direct data or resource sharing plan or a resource you're going to share, but the data management plan needs to go in for all of these. And my general impression from reading the changes is that it seems like NIH is now taking this more seriously than most. This was always sort of implicit before, but now the idea is to get it so that you were really able to share your data with other investigators. So this is generally, certainly I think we would all agree that this is a useful policy, and we just need to figure out how to implement it in the smoothest way possible. So regarding the data analysis plan, the differences, the data management plan, the differences, it seems that now in the new policy, NIH has emphasized making this useful for the people who would actually be the ones receiving it. So rather than just sort of generating something that's kind of bland, we're actually trying to target this in a way that you could easily share your data with another investigator and they wouldn't know what to do with it. Which is a key component because they want metadata, they want annotated data, and they're really encouraging common data elements, which is something we'll talk about here shortly, but these are just general things that the field and NIH has collectively agreed that these are good for studies, they're useful across a range of studies, and they allow investigators to compare kind of apples to apples. And one other component on this is that they want the data to adhere to this FAIR strategy, FAIR, which is findable, accessible, interoperable, and readable. So, a couple other notes from me. Just generally speaking, for those of you who have not done a data management plan yet, you need to include the type of data that's going to be in there. If you have any software tools that were specific to the way you're analyzing the data, so you don't need to report things like Excel, but if you're using more specialized software types, you need to include that, the code, and if the code's going to be available. You want your data to adhere to the standards in the field, which is mercifully flexible. For those of us, you heard that we all have different data types that we're trying to manage, and so there seems that that's more up to you. How you will preserve the data and the timeline over which you'll preserve that. So it's now an NIH policy that data needs to be kept for up to 3 years, but that can depend on whether this is an FBIR. You may be able to, if they have proprietary information, that will change that a little bit, as well as some phenome data and other things. But generally, 3 years is the sort of minimum standard. How that will be accessed by others, and whether it can be reused. And then finally, the oversight and sharing, which is something that will generate in conjunction with people at it. So this is sort of the institution. Couple notes, I suppose, or general notes, and then we'll get on to actually hearing from the panel. So, pardon my talking longer than I thought. But generally speaking, one note is that you can allocate funding to this. This is an important component. You can charge for time that you spend annotating the data, producing the metadata. You can bill for it if you need to put it in a repository, and the repository charges. Those are costs that are coverable. So keep that in mind when you're generating this. And also, you cannot charge for some things. So if it's something that should be included in the IDC, something that's infrastructure you can't charge for that. But just keep in mind that this is not something that's a new thing that's being imposed without some sort of backup. You are allowed to charge. And then finally, one more thing before we get too much into this. This is reviewed at the programmatic level. So when you submit a grant, your score will not be worse if you have a bad data management plan, or alternatively, your score will not be better if you have a great data management plan. So keep that in mind as you're figuring out how to spend your time on this. It's something that's done more at the programmatic level, which we're going to hear about shortly, but not necessarily at the reviewer level, and not necessarily time review. So with that in mind, let's move on and hear from some of our panelists. So just generally, can you both comment on, we'll start with you, Nicole. Can you comment on if these changes have really impacted the way in which you put these grants, if not generated?
Not too much. I mean, it's a new document that you have to make, but I kind of just followed some templates that were online and also provided to me by my collaborators and other institutions. And so they have a very specific template, and you have to fill in all parts of the template. And so for my field, like I generate a lot of sequencing data, so it was already expected for us to share that and CBI. And so just making sure that I counted for, I go through those throughout and say exactly how to share it, how to annotate it, etc. But I think we are make those open access fees so that everything that we publish in general, we actually always publish, like share everything already to the journal, and make sure that we have usually have a ton of supplementary data. And I was your co-PIs, but he was a corresponding PI, and I didn't really look at the DMS plan that he put in because it was the first time we were submitting the grant, and I was like, there's no way this is going to get funded. And then it got funded, and you were like, wow, that's super cool. And then the PO got back to us, but I already knew the PO because I had other grants for him. And he just was like, hey, you need to submit a better plan. And then I looked at it, and it was like completely the wrong format, so I tried to put it into the format that I already had for another grant that got accepted, and then that was resolved really quickly, thankfully. So, but I will know that a study section, no reviewer will ever see your DMS plan. So that's nothing that you see a study section, and that's why it's important. You also have to submit a resource sharing if you are sharing a resource. And a resource doesn't mean data. A resource means like you're making full tangible things that you can share. So that's what you include in the resource sharing plan. You have to, especially, but if you have a good SRO, sometimes reviewers in study section will be mad if they don't see that you're saying you're going to share your data, like on NCPI, for example. But SRO, they will tell them that no, that's actually the DMS plan, and you can't not prove that, right? So that's just the same. They submit a resource sharing plan, and then even if I don't have resources that I would be sharing, I would just say that just so that they don't, and then I say, see the DMS plan for new sharing, which they can't use.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so on the template part, I should have mentioned earlier that there are great resources for this on NIH's website. It's you can get them from Office of Research, I'm sure, but also NIH. Sharing.nih.gov has templates for various different data types. So if it's something as you go about doing this, there's some. So, Dr. Kennedy, how have changes to this impacted your?
Yeah. So our field is also moving toward transparency and open science. but not at the pre-grant writing stage. It's more like when you publish papers, you make sure those types of things. And so this is the first time I ever, and I don't do research that produces any resources, like I don't make agents, I don't animal models. And so I had never thought about this in a way like completely a priori. And so I realized that I needed to do this new form. Like I said, my grant went in right as this change went in. And so just my colleagues, whoever, no one, I haven't had to do one yet. I'm in the middle of like third year of my grant, right? So I'm like, well, I write it in renewal. So I have this now. Sorry, but if it works out, will you send me yours when you're done? I'm like, yeah. So I just found a template online from the NIH suggested templates. And I found one that was serendipitously close to like the project that I was writing, like the same type of MRI data, the same type of cognitive data. I'm like, this is great. So I basically just cut and pasted it into a different document and changed up how mine was different, right? In the end, they rejected it and said it wasn't the right format. You could have held it up to the template. They were identical. Like if plagiarism was a thing, that in this part of the application, it would have been, right? And so that was my experience. I also put in a whole separate little blank Word doc that says I have the resources to share, rather than just not filling one out. Just put in a thing that says you don't, because they'll go looking for it and say you don't have whatever. Here, just say you don't have. Always do that. Resources to share. Where we run into weird issues in my field, what we do is, so we do studies that take a long time. And so the entire grant is just a whole bunch of different studies. So there might be 12 publications from it, but not from aim one or whatever. And so it's not quite as clear how we do that. And then there's the part that tripped me up so badly on the plan was you have to say what data and detail it in lots of detail, which depository, how you're going to get your DOI linked to it, all of these things. But then at the end of each one is a when. When are you going to make this available? And that kept tripping me up because I'm not going to, it's supposed to be as early as the first project report. So at the RPPR, you're supposed to share data. I do a longitudinal study that takes me like 2 years to collect data. And so I'm like, surely NIH is not saying that they're going to make me share half of a neuroimaging project. So, well, here's 100 grades and the sample size is 200, but here's what I've done so far. Put it on open science for everyone in the world, other scientists to go grab my data before I finished collecting it, analyzed it, or had any chance to write a paper from it. Like, this can't be what NIH means by this, right? And so I went back and forth with so I got contacted by someone at the program level, and my PO, who I've known for 20 years, was CC'd. And so I was interacting with him, and she was just CC'd on everything. She never once replied, waited, and I've known her forever. So she didn't help whatsoever. She's a lovely person. I really like her. We go to dinner at like every conference. She never once jumped in on the CC thread. And so I'm working with this guy that I didn't know and have never heard of. And so I would say, well, here's a stab at this. And I kept track changes on, is this closer to what it is that you're wanting? And it was kind of vague each time it came back. And I was like, when am I expected to share my data that I've collected, and which data and why? Well, look at the templates and just, it needs to make sense. And I'm like, no, and what I wrote doesn't make sense to you, so you need to help me fix it. And so the very last section, like D, I think the very last section is basically, what is the policy from your university where they implement the oversight of your data security and sharing? And I was like, I have no idea, right? So it took me 2 tries to find the right office on campus that handles that. And I was like, do you have a boilerplate that I paste in here? And they're like, I don't know. This really isn't our domain. It's probably another domain. And so I CC'd the 2 people from the different IRB and the research and all these different offices. And eventually someone was like, oh, no, that's not what you're supposed to say. Here's a statement that probably will get you better. And so in the end, I had explained so many things. And then when I edited and turned it back in, it was so vague it hardly said anything, and they accepted it. And I busted my ass to try to get it as specific as they said, right? So all of my 3D brain files are going to go into this depository, and they're going to this, and they're going to be in BIDS format, which is our data standard for our field, all of these things. And then so I went back and forth with many edits of this form. And I was just so surprised that the one that everyone liked and was fine was so minimal and so vague that I couldn't leave it, right? So my really specific ones just kept getting shot down. It worked out in the end, but the next time I have to write one, I have to say I'm going to be a little confused and kind of from scratch be like, okay, here's the one I did last time. They liked it. And I have to say none of this matters, in quotes, until you have like a fundable score. Then the POs, the SROs, where they start digging these documents out and reading them. And so it doesn't go to study section. No reviewers see this. It's just your program officer. But it is what held up me literally like getting the grant. Like luckily I had such a good score that I knew I was going to get funded. So I didn't have to sit and wonder if I was going to get funded. So I'm like, okay, this is getting funded 100%. But like, what's the admittance when you go to NIH EIA Commons, it says the status, it said under administrative review, which is when you know you got the grant, right? Not the administrative review. It just said that forever. And so finally I kind of checked in and they're like, oh, yeah, it's under administrative review. That includes the data safety management plan and like a couple other things. I'm like, okay. They're like, yeah, just hold tight. And so then they're like, oh, it's your data safety management plan. And basically you can't have your grant until you get this redone in a way that we'll accept. And so I think I would have got my money, like my project start date might have been like a month sooner. And so it was like a month later that my grant started because of this plan. So it's super important, but it's not important until the end, like you know you're going to get the grant. I'm not saying don't do a good job if you think you're not going to get the grant, but yeah, by now enough people have done it, you can probably find colleagues to like get it. The template did not help me. I think it sunk me because I followed it. But probably different for someone else with the different SRO or PO or I don't know.
Yeah, well, that's a great lessons learned, I think, to have. I mean, for me,
I don't know what lesson I learned. Say less.
So that's what I was gonna ask you. So it sounds like part of this is because since the new policy, it's not that they knew what they wanted and weren't telling you so much as it sounds like maybe they didn't know what they wanted, so we're unable to tell you. And so if
they were like, are you going to share data at the raw level or aggregate level? I'm like, well, these types of data can only be shared at the raw level. These types of data can literally physically only be shared at the aggregate level. They're like, okay, well then you need to say why. And it was to the point where like for every measure, every variable in your study, you need to say which one that is. I'm like, this doesn't seem right. And then some of them you really don't know. Like there is no good in between. So I don't know. They kept asking me to be really, really specific. And the more I got specific, the more I dug my own grave because they're like, but then this. So I specified, but that. And then after I worked with the office and they like rewrote and track changed and helped me, it was like a half a page shorter. And the whole thing is only like 3/4 of a page total, right? I don't know. It must be better now. I think I was so early in the change. That's maybe why it didn't go well.
Sure. So I heard Dr. Nisco mention how things are generally formatted for repositories, et cetera, like genomic data. So that seems more straightforward to me to incorporate something where you say, we're just going to share this based on our normal way that we share this. But what about something that you wouldn't normally have formatted? So how do you guys think about incorporating something?
Yeah, I mean, there's other, there's take share, for example. There's other open repositories that I would say because when we publish all of the process, and we also put the raw data and supplement to make it accessible. So I think. Yeah, I mean, it's like Excel files, right? Like that was a format that I put. You're going to share an Excel file with the bacterial colony counts, like something that seems really, really silly. But it's something that I don't know. I think if you were doing that already, maybe it's easier to think about because like I was already that annoying person that had living long supplementing But that's just because I wanted everything to be transparent. Here is that like something. So yeah.
Similar for me, but I like to share my stuff at the level of every publication.
Yeah.
And so when I put that into the plan, they said, no, NIH rules are that you have to share it yearly at data collection. And I'm like, but I haven't published yet. And why would I share it before I publish it? Because it's my brand. And so I had a hard time going back and forth with that. But we put everything that isn't special, like MRI scans, things like that, on OSF. And so we just have an OSF. We have one big OSF like page for the lab, and then we make a new project for every publication. And then we link to it everything. Like there's a README file for medical data. There's all the Excel files for all of the data and the procedures and the methods. We put the highest quality version of like the figures all in there too. So we put everything in OSF. One neat thing about OSF is it has a little toggle button from private to public. And so I make it while I'm working on the publication, and I keep it private, which just means people who say in your lab can use it. And then once you hear that it's actually published by the journal, I go in and toggle it back on. And then I go back into my journal publication and I click the OSF link and I make sure it actually takes me back to that actual data, because editors check that too. And so that's how I handle it, which seems reasonable, but what I can't get around is you're supposed to share by each of your RPR reports. I still don't understand.
That's interesting, because that's not something.
And that's one of the things they push back so hard on. And I'm like, you can't possibly think I'm going to give my data away to like the community before I've had a chance to. And one, you're not technically supposed to analyze your data until you whatever. So it just didn't make a lot of sense. It went through, it's fine, but I still don't exactly understand what I'm doing. Yeah.
And there's basically until basically meeting like the entire time period, or when you publish it. Like that's what the reasonable is.
That's what I thought too until I started this plan. One other interesting thing is when you go to this place where the templates, the repository are, that website that he told you. It's in China. When you go to the repository and you find like the templates. Also, if you happen to work in an institute who already has things standardized, that's really awesome. So as I was scrolling, so I get funded through NIA, National Institute on Aging, but I noticed that like NIMH had all of their repositories and stuff already like worked out. And if you're in that field, you just follow the NIH repository thing. And so most of their stuff was literally boilerplate template, and you just cut and paste it from NIMH, put it in the thing. And all you had to do was like go to like, and this is on that template kind of sharing thing. You find like NIMH, whatever, and there's like a little drop down. And then under that, it's nested like the different types of projects you can do under NIH, and then the different types of data forms that you do. And you click on that, and it just goes straight. You just say, I'm following the NIH standard, the NIMH standard for do that. So check that first, I guess is my point. If you're in one of those institutes, it's worked out for you.
So do they make us check the MRIs? I expect that.
The world is coming close to where these things are mandatory. We're just trying to get ahead of the game and just sharing them anyway. Yeah, so they're de-identified and stripped of PHI. There's even now the new thing in our field is that you can do a 3D reconstruction of any type of MRI, and you can see the face of the individual. So now there's face stripping algorithms that we have to run after taking the PHI off. But that's standard. If you're in our field, you know to do that. But yeah, eventually it's going to be mandatory that you have to share it. And so since we know that it's coming, we just share ours and everything. Oh, it's not clinical. So this is only research. Yeah, there's no clinical reports or anything. And even if there were, there's no way that would ever be mandatory to share or even desirable to share.
My assumption is that for some of these clinical things, and this is something that we should discuss a little bit, is that talking with your SRO ahead of the time, if you have a trial that's still blinded, where you're not going to have access to the data prior to your first years. That's something that you do this, surely something that you could work out. But it sounded like,
Yeah.
it sounding like maybe talking to the SRO before submission, perhaps even just to say, here's what I'm thinking. Maybe that's not worth it. Like you said, it really only matters if you're in school.
Well, no, it's probably a good idea to just ask before. I didn't think. Yeah.
Well, lesson learned, maybe everybody can
Maybe,
take away
yeah,
from that,
yeah,
that,
maybe.
you know, maybe it's worth talking to your SRO
Yeah.
ahead of time and just getting clarity, particularly if you have data that's maybe not standard or not easily shareable, fellow IRB member, you know, think
Yeah.
how we handle human
Yeah.
subjects.
Or gigantic, right?
Yeah.
Like terabytes. So if I share my data from my project, it's terabytes, right? And then do you have to pay for that? And the other thing that confused me is that in 2 different places, I found conflicting information. That in one place it said, do you choose to ask for funds to pay for data management and sharing? This is outside of your $500,000 cap per year. And then I found another place in the paperwork that it says this is inclusive of. So if you were going to put that in, you would have, and you already have your budget done, right? You'd have to toss something out of your. So I just said, I don't want to. Planning forward, you might want to do that, put that in. But it would be a good idea to figure out if it's inclusive or beyond that $500,000 cap. Do you know which?
I don't.
I found it both places on the NIH.
I don't. My assumption is
Okay.
it falls within.
So it's yeah. So if you already have a $500,000 budget, then you can't click that and say yes. No.
So it sounds like talking to your SRO, perhaps talking to Office of Research as you get these things set up. Maybe
That's what I didn't know to do
Yeah.
ahead of time, and that's in the end the only thing that helped me and fix myself was I got them to get me to some magic, which I was happy with. So
Yeah, and I think generally you both mentioned this, but sort of general repositories that are in the field, even if we're working with non-standard data. So for instance, the study in individuals with spinal cord injury, it's a small population of individuals, but there has been an expansion of repositories for this, ODSCI, which is directly for spinal cord injury. So even if you work with data that you may not think is standard, maybe it's worth looking around a little bit. You mentioned open science framework, maybe it's better for preclinical things. So that might be something for us to all keep in mind as we put these together. So I think we're out of time from us. Oh, perfect. Okay, great. So then, okay, so it sounds like this is a pain, generally, or it can be, or it's at least confusing. Is there any way we can kill 2 birds with 1 stone, or you guys think through now, knowing what you know, when you're going to, as you mentioned, you're going to report this data anyway. You used to do it as a supplement, just kind of tack on the end. Can we think through how, or can you give some advice on how maybe you think at the beginning of a study, how am I going to ultimately publish this? Can I incorporate that to my data management plan?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it will give you, I mean, if you have it at the onset of the project, then it should give you a framework, right, of like how you're going to handle each type of data. It's something you can share and probably should share with the actual people doing the science, your study team, and your expectations for how they deposit the data. And, you know, we often do like wait until we're about to submit to upload everything to NCBI, for example, and we do have terabyte data because microbiome data is stupid. And you know, it will take several days, honestly, just to do the FTP. And so, yeah, starting it earlier, and that's what I've actually been doing now. It's like I've had my students kind of upload as you go. You just don't make it. And it sounds like it's the same.
yeah, use a sharing platform that lets you toggle.
Yeah, it really helps out so that you are not doing it all at the last minute.
They are really lovely people too. They just couldn't help me in this instance. Yeah.
Okay, any final advice from people putting one together?
Get a bunch of examples, like everything else you do in life. As many people as you can find who will share, take advantage of that. Share it. I was also going to say maybe, I think also when you pre-register reports these days, you can also kind of put in a section saying how you're deliberately going to share this after the papers. Yeah, so I haven't done that yet.
All right. Dr. Nisco, Dr. Kennedy, thank you guys very much.
Pleasure.
And I will now hand it back to Retha.
All right, up next, we will share a short informative video from Research Information Systems.